My special mystery guest was a female British tennis star. She's won 3 Grand Slams over her career, including the US Open, the Australian Open and the coveted Wimbledon title as well. She was the most recent British female tennis player to have won a Grand Slam until Emma Raducanu stormed to victory in the 2021 US Open final. Our tennis star played against some of the sporting greats, including Betty Stove and Billie Jean King, Chris Evert-Lloyd, or Chris Evert now. In 1982, she became the first woman ever to be elected to the Wimbledon committee, and her career spanned a total of 26 years, and she now features regularly as a tennis pundit in major tournaments. Tomorrow's Wimbledon kicks off, so I thought it would be fitting to have this wonderful woman in the hot seat. Who better than today, my mystery guest being Virginia Wade. Virginia Wade, wow, so great. Wonderful.
That was a fabulous talk-up for me. I feel quite embarrassed, actually. You know, I'm still very involved in tennis, but not to the same extent I was. So, you know, I live in the present, and I forget that sometimes that I did all those things. But what a great sport. Wimbledon is about to happen.
Do you know, I'm slightly starstruck, to be honest, because I used to watch you. I used to watch you playing against the likes of Chris Evert and all that. And they were, when I was young, they were the big tennis stars. The day tennis was, it still is actually, and always still is a really big, big game, isn't it? And everyone, all eyes go to Wimbledon. What made you decide to be a tennis player to begin with?
You know, sometimes the profession decides you. You know, I just love to play tennis. I was competitive. My elder sister and my brother played, and so I wanted to play. And then once I played, I found I was pretty good, and that was all I really wanted to do, although my father insisted that I finish university before I went full-time. So my career was a little bit later than anybody's career is now. But, you know, in some ways, it's the same as today's world, but in many ways it's so different. There are so many great players, so it's sort of like a real privilege to know that we were in that burgeoning time when the game, and especially the women's game, just blossomed. So in the 70s, you know, it was huge. I don't think today's players realize quite how big tennis was in the 70s, you know. And then when Bjorn Borg, for example, came along, and everybody would go and they'd be wearing their little feeler outfits and that. And, you know, it's just gone from strength to strength. It's a fantastic sport. It's good for everybody. And it's great that we've got a lot of young British players doing well now.
Yeah, about time, really. But when you were starting out in tennis, because it was quite, I know it was very big when we were younger, but there was a real differentiation between the women's game and the men's game. Have you noticed that things have changed and now the women's tennis is coming up to the same sort of, because the men got paid more, everything was bigger and geared towards the men. Some people didn't even want to watch women's tennis. I loved it all. But have you seen that gap close and things change?
Well, the only place where that gap has been a little bit slow to change, to equalize with the men and women, is still on the slow clay courts of Europe, because the men's game might be a little bit more stimulating on the slow clay, whereas on the faster courts, I think, to be honest, the women's game is a much better visual thing, because, you know, the men is boom, 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 and there are no rallies, where the women's, they are so good, these players today, and you get them. I mean, I've just been watching Eastbourne and all the grass court tournaments, and I mean, I will keep up to date with all the time. It's fascinating, because there's still more strategy, I think, in the women's game, because they don't have that just brute strength. But they're strong now. Boy, they hit serves at 125 miles an hour. I mean, I think I had a fast serve. I had a big serve, and I might have clocked it at 105 if I was lucky. But, you know, that was with a much smaller racket, with a wooden racket. So the technology has changed things by huge amounts.
It really, really has. And if you were to pinpoint, because obviously what you've achieved is quite incredible, and you know, when you hear it, do you think, crikey, I did all that, I actually did all that, that's me? When you hear that, is that what sort of goes through your mind? Wow.
You know, once in a while it goes through your mind. Once in a while you think, if I had today's equipment and I started lessons when I was 4 years old and had different technique and had a two-handed backhand and a big racket, and I would still be athletic. So that was one of my big strengths. So I guess I would be up there, but it's a different game, and you think, oh my goodness, I couldn't hold a candle to today's players. But if you put yourself in the same era, I think it's interesting. Good athletes are always going to be good athletes, and there were. I was always sort of close to the top. I was never number one. We had the fantastic Martina Navratilova and Steffi Graf and Chris Evert and Billie Jean and Maria Bueno, all those before. So it was exciting times even then, and great crowds. And Wimbledon has always supported the women, which has been fantastic and given them equal status. It took a while to get equal money. But I think, you have to bide your time. Sometimes you better not to rush things too much. So I think everything's going along very well at the moment.
It was like a magical time, though, with that particular era in tennis because of those amazing, great players, as you said, Bjorn Borg. You must have played and met these people. What was it like for you being in that?
I think it was actually, I have to consider that it was a really great era to be involved in, because I actually crossed over from the amateur stage when you traveled all around the world, you stayed with people, you made tons and tons of friends, whereas, now it's a bit more sterile. You have your little group of entourage, and I don't think you interact quite as much now. So, and there's always pressure. There's always pressure. So, whether the vast amounts of money, and because the competition is so dense and so tense now, I suppose there is more pressure. But there was always pressure, and that's one of the psychological things that's so incredible about tennis. The game is so psychological.
It is.
That the mental aspect is so important, and if you can believe in yourself, I think you can go far.
Would you say
a long time?
Would you say that is the element that's often missing in a lot of the British players, that psychological ability to get through it? Because if you watch, it was always, because we would always watch the British game, we think, they're going to crumble, they're not going to get through, they always crack. Do you think that that's been a major issue in British tennis in particular? Because when I watch it, that's what I see.
Yeah, no, I see that too, but I see it with a lot of players. There's certain players at the moment, even with the guys. I mean, I think somebody like Fritz, who is Taylor Fritz is such a good player, and Sinner, who's such a good player, and, I'm just taking a couple, but they look as if they're very tense on the court and not really enjoying it at the moment. And, that's what happens. The edge of your game goes off. It's very hard to get the balance right of how much you compete and how much you work on your game. But I think that in the end, the one advice I would give is that, look, losing a match is not a global catastrophe. There'll be another day. If you can get your winning and your losing into perspective, I think then you're not so afraid of losing. Everybody feels the pressure. It's funny because the lesser players will say, the reason I lost is because I got nervous. Well, let me tell you, the top players get just as nervous. They maybe just better players. But it's a matter of getting that perspective and that balance right of not worrying too much, and feeling that every match you have to go on, it's life or death if you lose, which it really isn't.
Now, your biggest moment then, in your view, what was the biggest moment for you in tennis?
Was winning Wimbledon. No two ways about it. I mean, Wimbledon for me was the dream. I mean, it was Wimbledon was everything. It was the only thing when I was first growing up and watching tennis. I was brought up in South Africa until I was 15, so there wasn't television there, so you'd listen on the radio. So Wimbledon, and then when we first came to England, we rented a house just in Wimbledon, so it was unbelievable. You go and you see Wimbledon, and, like some people's year will rotate around their birthday or something, mine would probably still does, rotates around Wimbledon. I just sort of try to keep myself not quite so emotionally involved as I used to be, but I love it.
Yeah, it's just such a good tournament. Who's catching your eye at the moment then? Who do you think is going to potentially win the women and the men's match? Who do you think's got a good chance? Who would you put money on if you were going to do that?
I would probably go with in the women's with two of the big hitters, like the girl who won last year, Rebecca. She's fantastic, but she got sick in Paris, so you know, she might be a little underplayed at the moment. Swiatek is so good, but I don't know whether she's unbeatable on grass. And, of course, Sabalenka could be really good in the women's. And then there are a myriad of other players who could compete. And on the men's, I mean, I'm not really, I just was looking at the draw again. I don't think that the real contenders who could have a chance against Djokovic, I don't think they're in top-notch form. So I think I can only see Djokovic winning.
You think Djokovic?
Yet again.
He's good, isn't he? He's very good. He's really good.
Yeah.
So outside of all of this then, because will you be commentating on Wimbledon this year as well? Will you be doing that?
I'm only doing bits and pieces. No, I decided a few years ago, you know, it's long hours, hard work, and, you know, I like to relax and enjoy it more.
Yeah. So what are you up to then? Are you retiring and relaxing? Or you?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, do bits and pieces here, but not too much. But life is busy and life is very good. So, and, you know, it's fun to talk to people like you.
Oh, Virginia Wade, it's so good to talk to you. I can't actually believe that I'm talking to you because I used to watch you on the tennis courts 30 years ago, Virginia. So thank you so much for sharing your story and taking time out to talk to me. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.